The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And thank you very much, everyone, and welcome on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. All the viewers here, representing all the continents of the world. And why are we here? Well, we have to ask ourselves that question every single time we come here. So each of us has our own reason. But I think we all agree on one thing: there's a lot of unfinished business. And every week seems to pile it on even more. But I think we're starting to see some serious progress. And the reason for that is because we're starting to see some real serious pushback. And as we said, when we went to the library and we seen the plethora of books there written by skeptics who waste their time putting down their fellow man. It's time to move ahead. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We're still discussing basic transmutation. The subject of emission is up again. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is September the 22nd, 2024. This is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. And yes, we're bringing all the continents together to try and follow up on our weekly series that we do with the Knowledge Seekers workshops and the Brazilian community on Fridays. And we try and streamline things, although it may not seem so at first. But when you realize that there's thousands of hours of teaching, and each of us has individual skills, each of us has different levels of understanding, and each of us are looking for maybe different ways of explaining the same thing, maybe we're going to have a better way to understand things. And so this becomes important. And as we see now, this emission in the light of the transmutation takes on a whole different context, because we're still on this hesitancy highway, and you know, it's really sad because it's the lowest energy state. But the lowest energy state is not a sad state. It's just that life is hard, and it's a hard road to hoe. And so as we look around and we go around, you know, sometimes we're chasing our tail like a dog. But what we have to understand is we are what we give our time and attention to. And so the real question becomes is, what is the mission of our emission? Because we're searching for outer space and trying to figure out what that means exactly. And as we try and increase our field strength, what is the ultimate goal? And that is to increase the emission to the plasma highway, to our pie in the sky. And does it have to be that little pie, or can it be the big pie? And is it our pie, or can we share that pie? Novel constructs, novel discussions, was not taught in school when I went to school, but somehow we all seem to understand this. And when we try and apply it into our daily application, daily society, daily activity, of course we use science. But if the science is misguided, how do we correct that? And so in book number 1, Miranda Kolikesh tried to unravel the universal order of the creation of matter. And yes, he did a masterful job. And then, of course, there's the structure of the light, which a lot of us don't understand. And so we want to be enlightened. Well, the light bulb is on. Trying to turn it on is a fruitless exercise. And book number 3, The Origin of the Universe. So the creation of matter and the origin of the universe are two different constructs. And this is a strange concept, don't you think? But what's even more strange is to understand that after 344 weeks of bringing together the one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace, brought to you by the members of the Universal Council, hosted by Rick Raymond, trying to express that it isn't for one world government, it's for one world of peace. And that world extends beyond our world. It incorporates another world. And that world also becomes an extension of world peace. And to link up those two, there is an emission of connection. Because we don't understand it or because we don't apply it correctly, doesn't mean that that emission of connection is not there. And it's not something that we have to create. It's really something that we have to use, because everything that we've been told is only a partial picture. And so we have commandments to guide us. But there are more commandments. And we don't really need the commandments in terms of physical manifestation, because it's ingrained within us. It's part of the plasma highway. We just need to get on that highway. And it's hard to get on that highway when we're stuck down here in the lowest highway, the transmission highway. And again, it's not altogether very bad. It's a very attractive highway. There's no question about it. And if it's so attractive, and it was attractive before we got here, and it will be attractive after we leave, why are we working so hard to make it beautiful? And so I think the answer lies in that we're also working very hard to make it ugly. And so we have to transition ourselves in our thinking to understand that it was beautiful before we came, and it should be beautiful when we leave. And the experience of the arrival should not be determined by the amount of garbage that we leave behind, but it should be determined by how much we can contribute to the growth, to the peace, to the beauty, and how we can convey that as universal functionaries. Because when we look at the universe and we create this MAGRAV pie chart, we seem to only want a piece of it. And that's because the speed of light is a constant transmission. But how can that be constant and still allow a variable transition? And so we have to understand that the speed of light is just one part of the pie. And if we go to another part of the pie, then the speed of light is a different kind of energy state. And so, do we have to choose which part of the pie? And so when we look at the MAGRAV, we see, well, what constitutes the pie is all three pieces of the pie. And what is the pie made from? A lot of people say it's 99% hydrogen. Not really knowing what hydrogen is, but if it's only 99%, and so it's a safe bet, isn't it? Because you don't want to go all in. And so that means the rest of it must be garbage. Or are we just on the threshold of that conflict between affinity and prejudice? And so to understand the terminology a little bit better, we had to see that anytime we do a transmission, we have an X, Y, and Z axis. But we know that we can do a transmission on different levels, on different energy levels. And in order to go through these different energy levels, we have to go through a transition. Well, which axis will you push through that transition? Well, you have to take them all. You can't take one and leave the others behind. I want to be on both sides of the fence. Oh, maybe I just want to sit on the fence. That way I won't be on either side. And so we come to the basic transmutation that we're discussing now, and we find that we have to take into account the transmission and the transition dimensions to facilitate the transmutation dimensions to facilitate the message. The transmutation dimensions are only the medium. And what is that message? And who is the messenger? And who receives that message? And so when we understand that how we're going from the surface of a sphere, which is in 2 feeding dimensions, to the volume of the sphere, which is the 3 feedback dimensions, and we find that mathematically speaking, 1 and 1 is more than 2. And the reason for that is because that 1 is not necessarily the same as the other 1. So the combination would be more than 2. But we don't lose the 1, and we don't lose the other 1. And we have to catch the answer. So really, 1 and 1 is actually more than 3, because we have 3 feedback dimensions. And since the ones who are observing this, that's us, and it seems to be more than 3 feedback dimensions, just a little bit. It's only, 3.14, which is pi. But 3 is an easy number for us, so we'll just fudge the number. And we're in that 4th dimension. We're the observer fudger dimension to suit our purpose, right? And what is our purpose? So when we made the cups of life, that was a definitive purpose. That was a cup of life, not a cup of the pandemic. And so the cup of life became a peace dividend from the pandemic because it taught us all how to do the nanocoding process, elevated us into the monatomic science, which was really a representation of our inner space, which came from the core space and represented our emotional strength. So we have this emotional strength. And where did it come from? And where is it going? And so these launch points and landing points are all nebulous points. But what is the transmission medium? How do we get there? Because I don't see the connection. So the connection is ingrained within our emission. And it is because of this emission that we have 2 cups of life. The emotional cup and the physical cup. And all we do is we change components in there. The key point is that we change the components in there. So we are the ones who are manifesting the cups of life. But we are manifesting the cups of life in physicality. From a plasma state, we are manifesting the GANs of life. And so we have the CO2 and the calcium, the zinc, the copper, the amino acid, and the water, all part of the essential ingredients for life. And so the GANs becomes a radiance manifestation in physicality of some kind of transference of energy that has to be, well, it has to be emitted from somewhere. And as we were all introduced into the Ganses, and I'll just speak for myself, if we were looking at life from the physical matter state, and we wanted to achieve more energy, then the Gans state would be a higher state. And did we create the Gans from the physical state? No. We created the pattern. You create the pattern, you get the energy. Where does the energy come from? The energy is emitted from somewhere. We become the absorbers of the energy. And in that process, the Gans manifestation is an absorption process. And one of those things that we can absorb is gold. But we can absorb a lot of things. And the reason for it is because this energy is being transferred all the time. And so in our basic understanding, if we studied physics, maybe we understood the atomic state. And if we studied the plasma science, maybe we understood the nanostate. And then there was the Gantt state. And all of these states were orders of magnitude stronger than the other. And now we come to the understanding that not only do we have to have a MAGRAV, which is a balanced state, on each state. So the atomic state has to have a balance, and the nanostate has to have a balance, and the GAN state has to have a balance. But when we transfer from one to the other, there still has to be a balance. Well, how do you balance one higher state versus a lower energy state? And so this becomes the skill testing for the knowledge seekers. So when we look at a frozen Gans ball, what we see at the core is a frozen ball of Gans. It literally is physical ball of Gans, and it's at the core. And so that becomes the cornerstone of the Gans. And then from there, magnetic hair-like lines are emitted in nanotubes, and they are hollow. And so there's no rotation that we can see, but there is a roundness. And so as a result of this emission from the gravitational core, we see this multidirectional emission. So when we talk about the plasma feeding, we see that there's a core energy, there's an emission energy, and there's energy that goes all around. And then we get these ideas, and we can share these ideas. Let me pack up an idea for you, and I'll mail it to you. And when you open that box, tell me what you find. Don't bother. I don't know your address, and I'm not sending it to you. I won't be mailing it to you. Because there is a connection, there's an emotion connection. And so we find that emission is a manifestation of emotion. So there are different kinds of emissions as there are different kinds of emotions. And so today we're just going to extend the talk on the emission and introduce an emission of retention, emission of attention, emission of declension. Declension is kind of a funny word. Speaking of funny, it was very funny to learn Latin in school. I often wondered if it would ever help me in life. And I must confess, it did to a certain extent, only in terms of understanding, but not in terms of a practical sense, because it did teach us about grammar. So the declension is a variation of the form of a noun, pronoun, or adjective, by which its grammatical case, number, and gender are identified. But there's another archaic definition. It's a condition of decline or moral deterioration, as in the declension of the new generation. So just like decay, declension implies some kind of reduction in quality, a gravitational force, in other words. But it's the source of the emission of intention. But it isn't the fundamental part of the emission of intention. And the reason I say this is because if we're talking about the emission of declension and how we look at a stone soul, and we find, well, a stone, it's pretty important, you know, it gives us anchorage, or we can engrave it and make a commemoration, or we can create an art form as a statue of some kind of image, and we can use it as a form of idolatry. Either way, it's an acknowledgement as confirmation. And of course, our arrival here is onto this third rock from the sun. And it's a good thing that we can count, because all of us got here knowingly. We didn't get here by accident. We got here because we wanted to get here. If we would have gone to Mars or Jupiter, maybe that would have been an accident. or maybe not. The point is that coming to this rock was an emission of declension. And so we can say, well, I was here and WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. And the thing is, you see a stone, but you also get the soul of the stone. In fact, we get all sorts of Earth space range details, the entire periodic table of elements, or as I now refer to it as the periodic table of prejudice, because we find that in some countries, certain elements are discovered, and in other countries, other elements are discovered, and they seem to segregate. And so that segregation, is that a form of discrimination? And discrimination is bad, right? Well, if discrimination was bad, then no one would be interested in a gold mine, or no one would be interested in lithium batteries, or no one would be interested in zinc or carbon. It would just be a mishmash of mishmash. And we know it's not the case because in our physicality, we also discriminate. We have kidneys, we have lungs, we have livers, we have feet, we have a head. And so each of those components is also a form of discrimination. So all of these represent a gravitational conformation of energy fields that come from the sun. They are emitted from the sun. And there are fields of energy that are emitted from the earth. And there are fields of energy emitted from the universe. And they come together and converge. And they give us this hydrogen. And this hydrogen has a fingerprint, and this fingerprint is a color spectrum in physicality. And that color spectrum is actually the emission spectrum of hydrogen, and it allows us to identify the hydrogen. And not just on Earth, but wherever we want to look at. And hydrogen is very important because it's one of the components of water. And so to understand the energy that is contained within that water, we have a pH scale, which shows the range from 1 to 14, which indicates whether or not it's acidic or whether it's alkaline, and the susceptibility of every point in between. And so the potentiation of hydrogen is a scale that totals 14. And we have to understand that a pH of 7 if it's acidic and a pH of 7 if it's alkaline are two separate pHs, and they come together and they create a total of 14. And this is important because we can deviate from the standard, the normal standard of 7, and we can basically split the water into different pHs. But what we find is that if we split this pH and thereby, say, create a pH of 6, we have to create a balance of 8 because it has to total 14. Likewise with 5 and 9, likewise with 4 and 10, and so on and so on. So the transition through the various layers of this potentiation is like a zipper, and it goes along this y-axis transition. So, but it goes up and down. And so we find that the acidic pH is alkaline forming, and the alkaline pH is acidic forming. And every point in between represents a susceptibility. And so that becomes a potentiation of balance. And so we're trying to get this balance, but we can never achieve this balance – because if we do, well, in whatever dimension we are referencing, we become invisible. So when we look at our Earth, what we see as one Earth planet rotating, we have to understand that the substructure is a plasmatic field. And that plasmatic field is an emission by planes, by axis. So the x-axis is a plane, and it's by rotation. The y-axis is a plane by polarity, and the z-axis is a dimension by interdependence with the x and y axis. So 1 and 1 is more than 3 here. And because with the pH transition, where we've gone from different densities on the periodic table of elements, we have this variety, with tremendous variety, and it's all created from the basic. And we just keep adding and adding and adding, and that becomes part of the creation. And so what we see is this matter plasma dimension, which as a feeding dimension is plasmatic. We can't touch it, we can't see it, but as a feedback, it's physical. We can touch it and we can see it, and we have to adapt to it. And we are feedback dominant. We are deciding on the dimension that we will reside in, and we are deciding which way the energy is going to flow. And thank you very much. I trusted you to get here, but now I don't trust you anymore. And so we get this matter state, which in a way, it's an affirmation of life. Yes, it is. But it's also a denial of life. It's a contradiction in terms. The matter state, both plasmatic and physical. But it doesn't answer the creation of the universe, because the universe exists from energy. And since the energy is always in motion, this is why the energy has a charge. The energy is always positive. So the charge is positive or negative based on motion. And if there's motion, then there has to be a combination of things. And that's why when we look at the structure of light, we find that the light goes between these two structures. But does that light go between two structures on the same energy state? Or can we go between different energy states and still maintain that balance? So when we look at this energy in motion, we need to put it in a package. We call it a parcel. And we find that that parcel can give and take. So when we understand the basics, the negative charge principle, where the negative gives and the positive takes, we find that the giving and taking of oneself is the binding of energy, and the giving and taking with another field is the flowing of energy. And so energy can be flowing or binding, and it all depends on whether we're feeding or whether we're taking the feedback. And so these are the basic principles of the magnetical repulsion and the gravitational attraction. But we as the observer, fudger, we have choices, and we can turn on and turn off the feeding, and we can increase and decrease the strength of the field. And therefore, it'll change our positioning. And that change can be either enhancing or diminishing our positioning. So the enhancement and diminishing refers to the strength of the field. But how do you know how strong you are unless you compete? Well, life is not a competition. Life is a cooperation. So when we look at the fundamental cooperation between hydrogen and oxygen, we find that, well, hydrogen is definitely the weaker and oxygen is definitely the stronger. But they create a MAGRAV condition, and that MAGRAV is round. And how do you create a round MAGRAV when you have this inherent imbalance within the MAGRAV? So we understand that this allows the energy to move. And so an electron can be sheared right off this energy parceling unit. And so we have positive energy that's looking for a home, and what it leaves is a negative energy, hydroxyl, which is also looking for a home. And so we have the one, and we have the other one, but we are going to create more. And so there will be a crossing over with other fields, or there may be a deflection, depending on the positioning and field strength, or there may be a twisting, which allows a tightening, a coiling, or a tunneling. And so all of this comes in the form of an energy pack. And if we understand an energy pack as energy in motion, and we look at it as how energy is packed in a battery, you can hold a battery, but you can't hold the energy. And when you hold that battery, you really don't know how much energy is in there until you connect. And so this is what we're talking about, the principal energy flow. We have to connect, and we have to connect on a two-way street. It's a two-way transmission and a two-way transition. And so as the Earth, we are the blue planet because we are the water planet, and we emit what we are. It's not that we're wet. What we are is a manifestation of emotion. What we are is we are universal functionaries with the benefit of the universal solvent of water. It's what creates this specific beauty on this planet. So we say, well, these two forces come together. We don't say which direction they come, and we don't say how much comes. But when they come to begin the creation, and these two forces, when they come together, they create a third, and that becomes the capturing of this field. And this field has a boundary. And when it captures this energy, the energy is still in motion. So we have to give it a way to keep moving. And so it can move around this field. And the easiest way to do that is through rotation. And while it's doing that, we cannot disengage from where this energy came from. And we cannot extract ourselves from the universe. So therefore, the energy has to keep coming. And in that process, the energy has to therefore keep going, leaving, in other words. And through the coming and the leaving creates emotion. And that creates a difference in position. And that difference in position is influenced by field strength. And that field strength is influenced by the neighbors. So the neighbors are contributing energy levels. The source is contributing energy levels. And we are contributing energy levels because in the process, we are able to absorb more of these PM ticks that come in and grow. But we are also able to release, and there's ways to do that. But the fundamental combination is always a MAGRAV, and that includes matter energy, dark matter energy, and antimatter energy. So we call these are the amalgamation of principal matter. So as a PM ticks, and they're magnetical, and they arrive, they go through a dilution process. In other words, they go down in field strength. They get captured into this field, and this field is the principal matter, the transition matter, and the convergence matter. And then there's a conversion because it isn't complete. All we've done is we've created a plasmagen state. And so that becomes the maggraph. Where is this maggraph? Because that is not specified. And so wherever it is interacting with another maggraph. And so once we have that determination, then we can have a field interaction, which we call inertia. And then, if we wish, we can have a physical manifestation. So we're talking about emission, plasma emission, because that emission is an energy in motion. And so we talk about the emission of retention, the emission of attention, the emission of declension, and the emission of intention. And we look at this whole thing and we say, well, which is which? So let's look at the emission of retention. Because why do we want to retain this energy? Well, because that's who we are. That's how we manifest into physicality. Without being able to retain this emission, without being able to retain this energy, we cannot manifest into physicality. We cannot manifest anywhere. We have to be able to retain it. It's a fundamental self-serving need. What about the emission of attention? Well, that goes through the poles. So we can emit through the poles. And at some point, the emission of attention, well, the most important point of our intention is the retention. And so as we emit from the poles, well, it just kind of goes around and comes back in the South Pole. And did we say we're chasing our tail? But we also emit away from ourselves because that's our attention. We're giving our time and attention. We're giving it. We didn't specify to whom we're giving it. We're not giving it to ourselves, but we are giving it for a benefit. And is that benefit exclusively for ourselves? Well, the emission of retention is exclusively for ourselves, but the emission of attention is a whole different ballgame. So the question then becomes is, since the source of the emission is from the same point, how do we decide if that emission of attention maybe changes its mind and wants to be an emission of retention? No, I don't want to give you. Or I do want to give. Or I can give. Or I can give more. Or, nah, I don't want to give anything. And as a matter of fact, I just like the taking. And so we have all sorts of ideas about that. But what we have to understand is that this emission, once it is emitted, has to interact with other fields. And we have to understand that there is a flow along the line of the emission of retention. So the emission of retention has to exhibit energy in motion. And so to facilitate energy in motion, there has to be an energy exchange. Well, what does it exchange energy with? Because you see, if that energy is being emitted, and that energy is magnetical, and like poles repel, well, that would explain why some are the emission of attention, and some are the emission of retention on the right side, and some are the emission of retention on the left side. And we're only saying left and right because we're looking at a two-dimensional picture. But we have to understand that this is rotating as a sphere. So it's an emission of retention on all sides. So all sides are magnetical. But if they're moving, they have to be moving to a gravitational force. And that gravitational forces would be on the South Pole. Well, so far, so good. Except that if they get absorbed in the South Pole, like poles repel. Well, if they repelled at the North Pole, shouldn't they repel at the South Pole? In other words, the emission of retention should never be completed, shouldn't it? So we find that the emission of attention is a two-way street. And if the emission of attention is magnetical on the North Pole, it has to be magnetical on the South Pole, which means that the emission of retention has to convert from being magnetical to being gravitational. Well, if it is energy in motion, and if it is going to be retained, it has to be more dense. In order to be more dense, it has to have more energy. So through the emission or retention process, more energy is gathered in. And we know that because when we were born, we were babies, and now we're adults. And so we're certainly a lot bigger. And where did that energy come from? And so that energy then converts to being gravitational, and it comes in contact with the magnetical fields coming out. And so it becomes attracted. And so the emission of retention becomes balanced. And in that process, we are able to have more energy to perform whatever we wish to perform. And so the emission of attention becomes more energy for us. And we can give our time and attention to more things. Well, more things for the purpose of what? And so the purpose is, of course, that we originally have this emission of declension that we talked about, which is at the core. That was the beginning. And that is the most dense. And so all of these emissions are a part of a plasma emission, and they are foundational to the physicality. So we have to understand that it all starts from the core. And so when we look at our manifestation, the dynamic plasma aura that we have around us is a plasmatic manifestation, but we also have a physical manifestation. And so the manifestation, regardless, is a manifestation of the emission. So we see the plasma emission as being part of all of this. But we're not alone. And we have intention. Where does the emission of intention come from? The emission of intention is not solely the emission of attention. It's not solely the emission of attention. And you know what? It's not solely the emission of declension either. So the emission of intention is a little bit more complex. And it has to take other things into account. So let's just look at the way the Earth is functioning. And as we see, well, we know that the Earth is rotating and that we have winds. And so we see that we have traditional wind directions. Some we call easterlies, some we call westerlies, and some we call trade winds. And we see that there's a commonality on the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. But there seems to be a problem. And that problem is that we know that the plasma field has a emission of retention. And because of the convergence on the equator, we have been able to have these two rotating spheres or hemispheres. But we also have a bit of a problem. And that has to be with the rotation of these plasmatic hemispheres. Because as you can see, the trades are flowing in the same direction. The westerlies are flowing in the opposite direction, and then the polar easterlies are flowing in the opposite direction again. So there's an anomaly here, and how do we resolve that? So we talked about the rotating hemisphere and how if we look at the north hemisphere and we stand on the North Pole and look down right from the pole, we're standing right on the pole and we're looking down and we're seeing the hemisphere rotate in a counterclockwise direction. The southern hemisphere is rotating in the opposite direction. Flip the pole, stand on the South Pole and look down, and it'll be rotating in a counterclockwise direction. So how is it possible that in the plasmatic state, the northern hemisphere is rotating in one direction and the southern hemisphere is rotating in the other direction, and yet the Earth in physicality is only rotating in the one direction? And so we find that the plasmatic field in the northern hemisphere interacts with the plasmatic field in the southern hemisphere and has another field in the core that extends along the equator. And so this becomes another emission point. So it's not just polar emissions, but it's the equatorial emissions. And so we have this one plasmatic rotating field. But another anomaly is that things are still rotating in opposite directions within that field, as long as they stay within that field. So some field rotations are magnetical, some field rotations are gravitational, and that all depends on which way we're going. So if we look at these eddy currents on the equatorial plane, they could be the emission poles on the equator. And we found out that if you have emission poles, there have to be absorption poles. And so when we looked inside the spaceship, and we see they're not only eddy cylinders, but they're eddy cones, and they allow the flow of energy in, but they also allow the flow of energy out. So the flow out is magnetic and the flow in is gravitational. And so the field flow is within the field. And this is important because in order to maintain a position, we have to have a dynamic plasma interaction. So when we look at our Earth space, how do we interact with some other space? Clearly, the physicality doesn't do it. There has to be some kind of emission from the Earth space, and there has to be some kind of absorption from this some other space, and then there has to be some kind of interaction so that the positioning can be determined. Without upsetting the field rotation. So in other words, when we have the balance and we have energy that is being emitted, and that energy that is being emitted is the emission of intention, and it's part of our dynamic beyond our aura plasma interaction. And so that becomes our launch point, and we see along the equator, we can launch the energy to a target point. But we're rotating, so we better keep launching as we're rotating so to maintain the connection. But remember that the rotating fields are going in two directions. We have magnetical fields and we have gravitational fields, and they are emanating from the principal fields at the core. So fields are emanating from the core, which we call magnetical fields, and there are fields that are converging into the core. We call those gravitational fields. And of course, the difference between the two has to do with density. So as these fields are moving, they facilitate the conservation of variability because each one is independent manifestation variable, each one. So the magnetical and gravitational balance of the maggrav condition is maintained regardless of the magnetical gravitational positioning and regardless of the susceptibility. And so the emission of intention has to be balanced off because we have to have a feedback from that target point, and that feedback becomes the launch point to us, and we become the target point. And aren't we glad that that happens? Because that completes our emission of retention, which is our self-serving need. And so we find the cornerstones of science are based on this plasma science at the nano level, the pico level, the Gans level, the plasma level, the soul level. And so all of these levels become channels for the emission of intention. And so the emission of intention, the way we recognize is based on the feedback summary. Well, we have the satisfaction of a fine meal or the sounds, the light, the heat, the pressure, the luster, the superficiality, or the laminar containment, where we have x-axis transmission and y-axis transition, and the dominance of man-made range deviation. But we find that there's no microbes in outer space. They're already quarantined here because humanity is quarantined in the spherical Earth space. But humanity is not quarantined in the transmutation of life because we have the gravitational confirmation of the oxygen emission spectrum, which again, too, is the gravitational manifestation of the magnetical field forces emanating from the sun, interacting with the magnetical field forces emanating from the Earth, and the magnetical field forces emanating from the universe. And this becomes very important for life on this planet because it's the other half of the water molecule. And so to understand these emissions, we have to understand the transmission spectrum that goes from the non-visible speed of plasmatic rotation to the speed of visible transmission spectrums. And to go from one spectrum to another involves the transition spectrum susceptibility. And that susceptibility is the balance between the superficiality of the physicality and the internal substance of the plasma substrate. It always is looking to maintain a balance between the gravitational and magnetical field force. But it's not in perfect balance because that point of containment is a containment of the plasmatic interaction. And in our physicality, we can see the physicality because we can see the color of the light. But the color of the light is variable within that containment. And then we see that there are other lights that don't have a color, but they're outside of that point of containment of our physicality, and they're still part of us. And then there's that one step beyond. And one step beyond that part that we have beyond the electromagnetic spectrum on the gravitational side and beyond the electromagnetic spectrum on the magnetical side, because the energy is always in motion and it's always in a parcel. And there's always an interaction. And so we talked about today the polar interaction and the equatorial interaction. But the energy comes from all different directions. And it comes in all different flavors. And it all comes in different field strengths. And if there is a common denominator, then it interacts. And as we can see by the periodic table of prejudice, we have a beautiful planet. And so it has been created through this plasma cornerstone of life. And as it comes together, we find that this is an oasis in space. And we can create an oasis in any space. And that space is created in any direction by positioning, by nearness and proximity. And so there's always a cornerstone of connection. And the emission of emotion is the connector. So we have to understand these relationships, the magnetical and the gravitational balance seeking. We call it a MAGRAV. And so we have the two scientific communities. And the plasma science adds to the knowledge of these two scientific communities and brings them together. The conservation of energy and the conservation of the spirit. And the plasma science, the conservation of knowledge, which facilitates the conservation of susceptibility and keeps everything in balance. And we need to say, thank God, because what a mess we've made. This principal interaction was here before we got here. And it was a representation of the intention of the emission from the sun and the intention of the emission of the earth. So we understand it's a two-way emission of intention. And if it's a two-way, that means when we go from the Magrav state of the atomic state to the plasma state of the field state, we can go beyond, at least one step beyond. But we can go the other way, one step beyond as well, because we can go up and down this ladder of field states. And as we've shown, how we create the gold at the Sanya conference in China. This is the new science. And so all of us can make a path choice. And so we understand that this path choice, whether it's the emission of attention or the emission of retention, and they seem to be the same thing, but they're not. The path link can change and the susceptibility can change. And there's a relationship of the path link and susceptibility, because that's what interacts to create the emotion of intention. And so we get to choose. We get to choose whether it's a point of conflict or a point of containment. And so when we look at how we bind our energy in a self-serving manner on this planet, we do it at the expense of others who depend on the same means of energy binding. And then we find that we are part of the horizontal community, and we're not rooted in our earth, but we are anchored to it. Whereas the vertical people, such as a carrot, are rooted. And they bind their energy the same way we do. But they don't fight the way we do. You think they know something? Do you think they understand the plasma rule where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength? Do they understand that this conflict point is actually a binding zone? And they make their choices, don't they? So why can't we make our choices? Why can't we target our outer space determination from this earth space manifestation point to that some space manifestation point? It's all relationships between the magnetical gravitational field forces, and those relationships are part of the reality dimension. So we need to get our antennas up and get this message, which is a manifestation of what we're feeding and what we're feeding back, and tune ourselves, tune our transition so that we can get the right transmission, the transmission that we desire. And understand that if we select one force, which is magnetical and balanced by a force selection of another, which is a gravitational force, so the resulting selections feed the Magrav manifestation. That's how it works. And so the selection manifestation is predetermined. And it's predetermined by us, by choosing the peace dome of intention. So the emission of intention affects the standard folding deviation and leaves no room for war. It's automatic. The transmutation manifests in balance with the peace dome. And the plasma balance is based on the fundamentals of knowledge and wisdom, which can give us deeper insight. And it changes our perspective and allows us to reflect on life. And part of that reflection shows that the misconduct becomes harder to rationalize and the historical references become meaningless. It doesn't help our pH balance. And the pH balance doesn't just seek a polar balance. We have to have a balance in all directions. The plasma balance is uncut in any state, and that state dependency and transcendence is also uncut. So the speed of rotation is interdependent and manifests in both plasma state and matter state. And so when we look at the MAGRAV pH and we see that there are many points on the perspective scale, and that speed of rotation affects the transmutation transition. And of course, we see on the blue planet here that the speed of rotation transmutes in both micro and in macro. And so when we talk about the pH of peace, we have to understand that there are many layers on the potentiation layers of emission, and therefore there are many points on the field strength of the dove. And we are learning that through the 2024 transmutation test, which we are now getting ready for the 4th test next month of this series of 4. We do these sessions monthly, and we've passed the 3rd. And we need to understand that there's more research that needs to be done. Basically speaking, we're still driving around with Model T Fords in the plasma science. It's not that the plasma science hasn't achieved a very advanced state. We're the ones on the hesitancy highway, and we need to get up to speed. And we've been trying for 556 knowledge seeker workshops in a row to transcend the limitations of nuclear science, because we want to give an opportunity for peace on this planet to exist, because we want to give an opportunity for us to be able to engage with the universal community, who is already engaging with the greater oneness. It's not to say that we are not engaging with the greater oneness. It's a matter for us to understand that this is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, and we're welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. There's a World Peace Treaty. If we want to engage in this endeavor, we have to sign it, and sign it with the proper intention. And yes, we need to sign it with a pen and display it proudly, but we need to sign it with a true emission of intention from our heart and from our soul. And as we look through the history, and we wonder if the calendars are spiral pointers of the x-axis sphere creation, and is man the reactor of a three-dimensional universe? So can man find heaven through the field transition? Can man go into outer space without a peace dome? No. And can man transmute through the dimensions of history? Yeah, we have to, because the emission of intention manifests into the physical transmission dimensions that we are all so fond of. Life is beautiful. Plasma science needs to be delivered daily via the peace dome in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. And that's the end of this class. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
And thank you again, Alex, for being with us and trying to figure out more ways on how to transfer this knowledge. Again, it's almost if we have a barrier up sometimes, even though we want to be open to it, a lot of this just doesn't make matter state sense or follow our educational teachings. But of course, we're understanding more and more of the structure that we've been educated in. So thank you again for bringing a new dimension. Let's see if any of the participants would like to bring a question or make a comment or add to the knowledge if they'd like. I got a little confused when you said you can have a 7 pH that's neutral, but how could you have an alkaline or an acid in there? I'm just not following. There's a block somewhere on this pH, and I'm thinking this is the way we can split ourselves. As he mentioned, I think in the last workshop, this ability to split and be in two locations, this bilocation ability. But apparently the solutions are able to do that, but I'm not understanding what you're saying about the 7. I thought the 7 was neutral, neither being alkaline or acidic. I mean, that's what my meter tells me.
Sure. So you've got the acid side, and the acid side starts at 1 and goes up to what?
6.99999.
Keep going, keep
And
going.
okay, there's probably another figures. And I know the base side, the 7 and above, is usually what we consider base or alkaline.
Yeah, but let's say, you're on the acidic team and you say, well, I'm acidic because my range is from 1 to 7. Well, the alkaline team is going to say, well, my range is from 7 to 14. So now you've got a problem. If you're 7, are you acidic or are you alkaline? And so really the answer is, well, you're both, aren't you? Because you're neutral. 7 and 7 is 14. But because one is alkaline and one is acidic, they balance out. It becomes neutral. You can't say 7 minus 7 because then you would have to say that if you create the acid, you would create the alkaline.
Yeah, but if I was 8, where do I get the 6 to become the 14? It would seem my
Six
whole
and eight is 14.
right. Where do I get that 6 to make the 14? This is what I'm having, or if I'm 6, or 5, where do I get the 9 to make the 14? Where is it? Is it all in the solution? It's just a matter of showing a different face, perhaps, of that
Well,
solution?
no, that solution is right here. So we know that when we make the cup of life, we have some things in the atomic state, right? We have the copper plate. We know we have some things in the nano state. That would be the nano-coated copper coil. And we know we have some GANs in there as well. So the interaction of the atomic and the nanostate created a field. But the thing is that if you say that the atomic state is 1, and if you say that the nanostate is an order of magnitude higher, and let's just say 1 order of magnitude, so that would be 10. So 10 and 1 is 11. But the GaN state is an order of magnitude higher than the nanostate. So that's 10 times 10. Well, that's 100. Well, how can I add 10 plus 1 and have it equal 100? It's impossible. Unless we haven't taken something into account. And so that would have been the energy transfer that comes from a higher level. And that higher level is not on this graph. It's higher than the GaN state. So if we were to take the GaN state, which would in that case be gravitational, and no, excuse me, I'm wrong. It would be magnetical because it is of a, no, I was right the first place. Sorry. I don't have a program.
All right, make up your mind.
Number 3. Okay, the GaN state is gravitational because it's a higher energy, so it's giving, and it's giving to the nanostate. Okay, so, but the thing is that the GaN state can't give because it didn't exist. We created the GaN state from the nano to the atomic state. So the GaN state had to get energy from another, and that other energy was of a higher energy state. So in relationship to the plasma state, then the GaN state is magnetical, but in relationship to the nanostate, the GaN state is gravitational. The higher state feeds the lower energy state. So indirectly, if you're looking at that balanced position, you find that the GaN state was created from the interaction of the plasma state, and that plasma state shared the energy with the GaNs and the nanostate and the atomic state, because energy is always in motion. So the atomic state is a maggrav and is giving and taking, but so is the nanostate. In order to maintain its maggrav, it's giving and taking. And so is the GaN state. And so what you've done is you've increased the number of fields that are interacting. Had you not made that pattern, you would have only had the atomic state. And that atomic state would have been in a maggrav condition, interacting with its own attention, with its own retention, and its own declension. And so by introducing the nanostate, now you've elevated that energy interaction. And you've created a pattern. And then when you bring the GaN state in, you've enhanced that pattern. Now you have more at stake. And so now you're drawing in the energy from the plasma state. We have to remember that what we're dealing with in the cup of life and in this particular description are all inanimate things of the periodic table of elements. But we are animate. So all of these components are represented in our physicality as well. So the physicality of our skin and our bones is in the atomic state. The surface of our cells and our bones is in the nanostate. And the space in between is the GaN state. And the plasma state, well, the plasma state is the emission state that is connecting the soul of the man and the soul of the physicality and manifesting the physicality. How are we doing, Mark?
About the same. Still trying to understand more.
Well, take a dollar bill and throw it up in the air and see what you get.
I don't get it.
You would just get a dollar bill. Nothing happens. There's no interaction. You spend some energy to crumple the dollar bill and you throw it up in the air and it comes back to the ground. Still a dollar bill. Right?
Right.
It's in the lowest energy state. And the only way the dollar bill moved was because it enlisted your service. You had to expend the energy to crumple it. You had to throw it. You had to pick it up. Dollar bill did nothing. Absolutely nothing. So, and someone actually spent the energy to print it. And some tree spent the energy to create the atoms to contribute to the physicality of the dollar bill. Energy in motion has to do with the interaction of fields. The dollar bill is not a field, but we are. That's why we threw the dollar bill. The dollar bill can't throw us.
Does that dollar bill have a soul? Everything has a soul.
Hello, hello, Mark.
Hello,
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 Alex.
Claudia. Welcome.
Hey, Claudia.
Hello. I was thinking about this week about you said about the rotation, and I always think in my body because it's easier than to the universe. And about this last teaching of Mr. Cash that we are double, like two parts. And I was thinking that if I have a soul of the man, that the rotation is anti-clockwise, and my solar physicality is clockwise, and this came by the rotation of the veins and arteries. But we have two parts. I have two legs and I have two arms, and both have arteries that go down and veins that go up. So they are like, they work alone, both sides, and cross in the heart and like have a great energy, have big energy. And I was thinking, but we have like electrical energy too in our heart. So I was thinking, okay, if the rotation comes the same, the soul of the man, the soul of physicality, I die. I go beyond and I travel with my soul. Okay. But this electrical part, I was thinking when this like origin of the electrical part of my heart. I am not I respond for that. And with the transmutation, this electrical part will stop and will increase the both souls will come together and will increase the energy and go beyond with another dimension. And how can I like have the electrical part again? This is my question. It's was a thinking, and I think I have a dream with this too. And thank you.
Well, thank you, Claudia. It's a really excellent question. The understanding of electricity is that it's of the lowest energy state. And it would be correct in our understanding to say that, you know, that the heartbeat creates a electrical discharge because that's what a ECG is. But the thing is that that is a physical manifestation of a plasmatic manifestation. In other words, that the beating of the heart is instigated from plasmatic interaction of these magnetical gravitational fields, which are linked up to a principal field. But that is only one side of a structure. And that structure, based on your question, would be the soul of the man. But there is a second field, and that structure is the same. It's the soul of physicality. So the two fields are actually interacting together and overlapping each other. So if we look here, and we can see here, if this plasma emission becomes a physical manifestation, then we can see that the emission of the declension would be in the brain, and the soul of the man would be at the core. If we look at the soul of the physicality, that would be the aura. And that aura represents the field force that contains our physicality. If we look at the Earth, the magnetosphere is the emission of retention of the Earth. That's what keeps everything inside. And then if we look at the core of the Earth, that has the highest gravitational energy, and that's right at the center. But the actual center is hollow, because that's where the soul of the Earth resides. So we have a similarity here where the soul of the Earth is at the core, and the soul of the physicality of the Earth is the magnetosphere. The soul of the man is in the core of the brain, and the soul of the physicality is the aura of the physicality. And so the field that's in between is the field of the presence, the physicality. And we can operate in that field. And within that field, we have kidneys, we have liver, we have the blood, we have the bones. All of these things are manifesting between those two extremes, because those two extremes are the boundaries, and everything else in between is the interaction. But as we discovered last week, we have some anomalies, and one of those anomalies has to do with the field rotation. And so we see that the field rotation with respect to the, say, the wind, is rotating in the same direction when we know clearly that the plasmatic rotating hemispheres are rotating in the opposite direction. Well, so how do we rationalize that? And so we have to realize that the inertia of the physicality is the manifestation of two plasmatic fields. And when you bring two fields together that are rotating in opposite directions, you know that when you sharpen your knife on a grindstone, that their sparks will fly. But the anomaly is that when you bring two plasma fields together, they will overlap. There will be no conflict. There will be no sparks flying. And this is fundamental to understanding the transmutation process. Because where one field in relationship is gravitational, the other field in relation becomes magnetical. So in fact, what would happen here is that if I were to take this and just, how would this work? So okay, so what I want to say here is that I really don't like this whiteboard.
Maybe you want a thicker line?
Maybe what I need to do is, can I?
Yes, you can.
Oh, where would the oh, just a moment. I think I found something. One moment, please. Let's let me just how do I get rid of this? Sorry, Claudia. How does that work? Oh no, this is everything is so good, and then this is so. Oh, I see. Okay, that was good. All right, please. I'm going to try using something else.
We indulge you.
Okay, that doesn't work.
Is it a whiteboard you're looking for or something else?
Yeah, I'm looking for a whiteboard.
Okay, let's see if I can
It
bring
used
you
to be so easy.
Yes, I know. I'm gonna take the where is the whiteboard?
Oh, no, okay,
Oh,
see?
just a moment. Okay, let me just oops, this is not supposed to be there. I don't know why that's there. You cannot minimize Zoom. Okay.
Oh,
Share.
just a moment. I'm going to get the whiteboard.
Okay. There it is. Good.
Are we there?
I think so, but the other participants need to be careful because if you don't limit them or something, they can scribble on your screen. So we won't do anything other than allow you to annotate.
Oh, I don't know. Okay, well, let's try this. This is the Northern Hemisphere, and this will be the Southern Hemisphere. Okay, so the point that I wanted to make, and let's see if I can find a color. Oh,
Right,
there we
and
are.
didn't Mr. Kesh say the sun, the soul of the man, and the moon rotate anti-clockwise, but the earth rotates clockwise?
Yeah, but it doesn't matter.
Okay.
What we're mattering is the exchange of energy that goes from one side to the other. That's what matters. Which means that if this side here is
It really does have that look of the two halves of the brain, doesn't it? If you turn it 90 degrees.
I can't believe it. I mean, we've actually regressed. I got to learn how to use a whiteboard all over again. I thought this was okay. So this is magnetical. Okay, well that shows. And then this is gravitational. Okay. But in order to balance, then we also have to have this as magnetical. And we also have to have this as gravitational. Okay. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that this has to be, okay, this line here has to be in balance, which is to say this has to be in balance and this has to be in balance. Let's try it again. This has to be in balance. There. Okay, so if this is in balance, now it's a maggraph. So energy comes in because it has drawn the energy in. So that's one field, but it cannot retain that. And so if it comes into another field that has the same kind of affinity, there won't be any grinding. Even though it's rotating in the opposite direction, there won't be any grinding. It'll just transfer the energy to the other field. And at that point, that other field then has the capability of, because it now has more energy, to be more gravitational and it'll draw more energy in. But it cannot retain that energy. It has to give. And so it'll just give right back to the first one. So we'll have a giving and taking from one to the other, and a giving and taking in return from one to the other. And so this income combination here, we used to have all sorts of oh my God. Oh, we lost so much. Okay, we used to have so much. Oh, I don't even know what that is now.
Gosh, I moved my cursor from the border over to my other screen and I had a pen in my hand, pen on the cursor. Now it's gone. I don't know again what happened there, but it's more complex, but actually probably better if you understand how to use it. I don't fully.
Well, I really apologize for this unprofessionalism, but you
It's
know,
okay. It's no problem.
let's make
We
sure that we
accommodate.
understand what
No
we're
problem.
trying to achieve here. Let's look at the message instead. So what we have to understand is that there's a core. That core is gravitational, and the magnetosphere that goes around is magnetical, and everything else that's in between is operational. So everything else that's in between is free to rotate however it wants. And through the rotation, it will determine its field strength. And through the field strength, it will determine its positioning. So not all the fields within that are rotating at the same level. So that's why, you know, we have a left leg, we have a right leg. There's clearly a difference. And this is one of been my original complaints when I got into studying science. And, we were so happy as Canadians, that Watson and Crick, figured out the DNA. And yet the DNA was the same in every single cell. And how can that be? So the cell in my thumb, my left thumb, is the same as the DNA in my right thumb. So the DNA was not the determining factor that made left-handedness or right-handedness. There was something else. And so that became the question. What is that something else that is going to do it? Okay, so it isn't the DNA. It's what causes the DNA. And so we find that it's the RNA that causes the DNA. But even then, what causes the RNA? Okay, so we keep going farther and farther back, if you will. We keep going farther and farther away, if you will, from the physicality. Well, we're not going farther away from the physicality. We're understanding that the physicality is a result of everything that happened. The physicality is the evidence. What we're not seeing is what causes that evidence to happen. And, as I say, you go to a murder site and you see a body and you see blood on the floor and you see bullets. You don't see the gun and you don't see the guy who pulled the trigger. So what are you going to say? Well, there wasn't a murder? You have the evidence that there was a murder, and you have enough evidence to suggest that there was a gun, though you can't see it, and there was someone pulling the trigger, though you can't see it. And so someone, who is a novice may say, well, you have no proof that someone got shot. And so we have these strange cases where someone commits suicide twice. It's like when I saw the movie Armageddon, I couldn't wait for the sequel, Armageddon 2. It's just this line of thinking is just like totally ridiculous. So we have to understand that there is an answer. And if the answer doesn't fit, then maybe we are not looking at it properly. So why is it that when we grind a knife on the grinding wheel, we have sparks? But why is it that when we have the rotating hemispheres of the brain or the rotating hemispheres of the earth, we don't have sparks? But what do we have? We have a MAGRAV condition that allows for the taking, giving, and taking of energy. And as we draw more and more energy, the earth was getting bigger. But in that process of getting bigger, the earth was becoming more dense. And so that rotation wasn't a circle, it was a spiral. And that's where we got into it. That was the whole thing. If we Claudia, do you have any questions on what I'm showing here?
No, I'm understanding. So every neutron have a rotation different from his electron. That's become the movement. When they become the same rotation, they become together and go to another dimension. That's it.
Well, the anomaly comes to when two fields come together that are rotating in opposite directions.
After, but before they rotation the same way or not? Because I am alive because the soul of the man in my head is rotating in opposite way of the soul of my physicality.
Right.
So if I die, they will become together in the same rotation.
Yes, they will come together in the same rotation, but they would have what the new science is allowing us to do is to enter a third dimension into this understanding. This is the new science.
Mm-hmm. So when Mr. Cash give us energy inside of ears and go direct in our motion of our brain, this he's trying to move to change the rotation of the soul and not the solar physicality, correct? I'm not
Comment
listening.
if that's correct or not. What I will say is that what we're looking at is a supplementation of the energy.
Okay.
Because there is a diminishing, first of all, in the way we conduct ourselves, we're not getting the full complement of energy. We are in need of supplementing our energy, and we do that by the process of food, or we do that by the process of lying, cheating, and stealing.
Behavior, yes. Mm-hmm.
So what the technology is doing is enhancing our ability to absorb the energy naturally, which is from the universe. So that increases the gravitational effect of our solar physicality to draw energy more from a higher source. So our soul, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I interrupt you. Sorry.
Okay, well, don't forget your question. So the thing is, the solar physicality is working from a diminished standpoint because it is trying to draw more energy from its physicality because that's the way we've been conditioned. We have to change our focus on our emotional level to draw more energy from the soul of the man. The soul of the man will give all the energy that we need. It's just that we are obstinate. We're not absorbing the energy from the soul of the man that we need. We're choosing to take it from someone else or to take it from the weakest state because we've grown comfortable with it and because we can. And because of this, we get abused. And that abuse is what starts to consume our energy. So we're getting energy from a weaker source and we're consuming it. If we were to able to maintain a maggrav position like the sun, which is a catalyst, then we can exchange the energy to maintain our maggrav position without going through the consumption. And also, then we don't have to steal from others. What is your question, Claudia?
And I was thinking, like Mr. Cash explain us the GANs of the zinc GANs that work with our emotional part, and I studied a little bit about the periodic table. And do you think that have another element that you could work with the emotional part that have nerves that could help this emotional part?
Did you say nerves?
No, the emotional part, the elements of the periodical table that we could work, like do GANs, different GANs that can help this our emotional part beyond the zinc.
Well, the zinc is directly related to the emotional part. It's that the emotional part is complex.
Mm-hmm.
The soul of physicality has an emotion, and the soul of the man has an emotion, and of course we know that the physicality has the emotion. But this emotion and the physicality is actually a feedback to the environment. Well, if it's a feedback to the environment and the environment has an emotion,
Mhm.
So the question then becomes is how does the earth convey that emotion to us? And if we understand that there's a balance, so for instance, if there's a war in one part of the world and that there's peace in another part of the world, would you say that those two are not connected? Would you say that one doesn't have an effect on the other?
I think they work together. I think that's
Of course,
this
because they're
difference,
part.
I think, is good.
Well, yeah, because they're part of this entire MAGRAV condition.
Hmm.
So if we say on the blue side there's a war and on the red side there's peace, and so these are counterbalancing forces. And you say, well, okay, but you know, a counterbalancing would be some midpoint between war and peace. So, you know, what would that midpoint be? Would it be, you know, sometimes war and sometimes peace? Maybe Monday and Wednesday we'll have war, Tuesday and Thursday we will have peace. Is that how it works? Or would we say if the war is based on the need, which is based on a lack of, if we're looking on a lack of energy, a lack of food, a lack of money, a lack of territory, or just even a lack of peace, and that would be the basis for the war. And then we look on the other side and say, well, that's at peace. But if you look inside the society, you know, there's a lack of money, there's a lack of food, there's a lack of peace in the household. There's a lack of social satisfaction. Um, Maybe there's a conflict with your neighbor or conflict with your boss or something. So it's not on the magnitude of war, but it certainly isn't peaceful and harmonious. And so if you look at the plants, for instance, the plants, you know, are trying to be peaceful and harmonious, but we keep eating them. So they basically have to give of themselves to feed us, and then they have to create more to supplement. So in essence, the fact that we're eating them is causing them to keep growing. And
So if I think that all the is peace in Earth going to the peace, we are moving to like another rotation, and the Earth will go in another dimension. That's it. The same thoughts that we have in our body.
hmm. Well, these are really tough questions.
Can I say something here?
No, I am thinking with you. Sorry.
Hi,
Like a
Lex.
conversation. Thank you.
Go ahead, Selena.
Yeah, hi. How are you, everybody? How are you?
Welcome. Welcome.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I don't know. A few minutes ago, I just cried, and then I opened the Zoom, and then I heard the clear question heard properly, but I understood what is he trying to understand. Actually, I feel our body is in pain. We want pleasure. Every soul, when they get pain, they want pleasure. They don't like pain, so they want pleasure. So when we are in pain, so we want to remove our pain. That's why we do make pain to others, and then we think we will get pleasure from that. In the whole world is happening this thing. This stuff is happening everywhere. The war and all kinds of bad thing is happening in the world because of the pain. Everybody in the pain, and it is different kinds of pain, and we don't know how to alleviate the pain, remove the pain. So we are trying to remove the pain different way, and it is making pain to others, more trouble to others, but we don't understand. When we think different way, when we understand others' emotion, others' feelings, others' sadness, others' need, and forgive them whatever they did in past to us or doing to us. Now we have to understand they are in pain, and when we will get that understanding to our soul, our emotion, we'll find a way to remove this pain and these kinds of behavior. And when we get in peace, the earth will be in peace and everything will be in peace, because we are all related. Sometimes I not sometimes, almost pretty regular, I say in Bangla teaching, we are in the creator's body and creator in us. Creator is in my body. So if we are all of us inside the creator body, so we are not separate and we are not different. We are bigger or smaller, we are same inside the creator body. So if we make a problem to each other, so it's never gonna be solved the problem. We have to understand each other emotion, each other feelings, sadness, and share everything. And we need to try forgive each other, even us too, by ourselves too. So that way, I think so. The solution will be here, and majority when we understand this way, everything will be solved. We are in pain body. We are constantly trying to get pleasure, making trouble to others. It is the problem. Problem is very simple, but we don't understand. We are not trying to understand that. But if we understand, most of us, if we understand, I think so, everything will be changed. That's it. That was my emotion today, my understanding today. That's why I opened my mic.
That's
Thank you.
excellent. That's excellent,
you.
Selena. Yes, the point of the highlight of what you said is that, we talk about forgiving others, but we also have to include ourselves in that forgiveness. And we also have to understand that the forgiveness of the others has to go beyond this generation as well, because that has been encapsulated in our RNA. because our RNA is a summation of our trip, of our journey, the journey that got us here. So everywhere where we go becomes part of our existence, part of our memory, and that memory gets carried forward. But all the memories get carried forward. So the question then becomes is what is our interpretation of that memory? And, so should we be resentful? Well, we have to ask ourselves, so if in our memory we have something that happened to us that was very bad or someone caused something very bad, should we be resentful for that and should we carry that baggage for the rest of our life? The problem, of course, is that we have to carry that baggage. And I say, well, like, why do I have to carry that baggage? Because I'm resentful for someone else did to me. And so it becomes really pointless to do that because the damage has already been done. And I am just compounding the damage and carrying it forward because now no longer the damage that someone did to me, by carrying that baggage, I'm now doing that damage to myself. And a lot of people use that as a badge of honor. Oh, when I was young, blah, blah, blah. And, life dealt me a bad deck of cards. And, that's why I am, misfit. Well, that's not an excuse. But they choose to take that as an excuse. And so that would be within the generation. But there's also a transgenerational problem there. So something could have happened in the past. Oh, we were invaded by these people 300 years ago, and we will get our revenge. You've been waiting 300 years. And when you think about it, that's a long time to carry that baggage. Wouldn't you like to, have a rest? Why don't you put that baggage down? As a matter of fact, why don't you walk over here and hope someone steals that baggage from you so you don't have to carry it anymore? And so we have to make that hard decision. And that decision to carry that baggage is kind of gives us a reason for being. That's a lousy reason. There's got to be a better reason. And then the same thing happens if you did something harmful if your grandfather did something harmful, that obviously gets carried in your DNA. And so do you carry that forward? You don't even know that you have it. Maybe it's at the basis of your prejudice. You don't even know your prejudice. So, that's makes life difficult if you're having these obstacles. So why not just remove these obstacles and understand that the universe is benevolent, the universe is forgiving, and the universe is bountiful. So, there was a time, when I did something and it cost me a lot of money. And I was very upset about that. And there were consequences as a result of it. But if we understand money comes and money goes, and everyone dies poor. Even the rich people die poor because the measurements of wealth or poverty is in a physical state. And when you die, you're no longer in the physical state, so you can't take it with you. So forget that money. And so the real thing is the shame that happens when you have a lot of money that would be beneficial in some ways. I mean, money does have a positive benefit, but if you have a lot of money and you want to get more, you'll get more. but you'll still die poor. So, why are you stealing from others? It doesn't make sense. You say, well, I'm going to have more. No, no, you're going to lose more because everything you have is going to be gone because what you're having is of the lowest energy state. You've shortchanged yourself. You fooled yourself into thinking you have more. You actually have less, and even that will be taken away from you. And people don't understand that. And it is hard to understand because people like Socrates will argue with you and use that as a form of entertainment. This is not entertainment. This is a matter of life and death. You're a soldier of fortune, so your loyalty is based on how much money you get. Well, when you die, you'll have no money. So you have no ethics because your loyalty is based on something that is worthless, money. And you know that because when the soldiers come home, they suffer from PTSD because there's not enough money in the bank to wash away the memory. And that memory will be ingrained in the RNA. Can we help them to relieve that binding energy? Well, yes, we can, because that binding energy is an acquired binding. This is a novel approach because when you look at the generational approach to relieving the painful, Selena talks about the pain, to relieve that pain, whether it's from this generation or a previous generation, whether it's pain someone caused you or whether it's pain that you inflicted on someone, there will be a balance. There will be a judgment, and you will be the judge. And you always are the judge. And this is where the conflict comes between the soul of man and the soul of the physicality. And there shouldn't be a conflict. There should be a conflict resolution. Those two could come together because the universe operates that way. What we see of the universe is only a small percentage. And we think that's the way everything works in the universe. But we have evidence all around us that that's not the way it works. So we pick and choose through our selection process what we want to give our time and attention to. And so you can argue however you want, and you can argue that red is blue and blue is red, and so be it. You want to do it that way, that's fine. But if you want to accept reality, then sometimes the reality is a hard thing to accept. And you say, well, it's your fault. But I'm not accusing you, I'm accusing me. Well, then if I say, okay, well, it's my fault, I need to be forgiving for myself. And people are not willing to do that in our conditioned society. And so we need to shift that balance. So there is a blame. And so we like to blame others. But in reality, we're the ones to blame. So, if we can't forgive ourselves, we certainly can't forgive others. So the forgiving of others and the forgiving ourselves has to work together. The net effect is the same. So it's a dropping of the baggage and understanding that the manifestation of what we have is a result of our actions. It didn't happen by accident. Whatever happens, happens for a reason. And it's easy for us to be referees and saying, oh, well, you did that wrong and you did that wrong, and I have hindsight, so my sight is perfect. Put yourself in the situation and see how perfect your sight is. So we need to improve our skill. And understanding the science is very, very helpful in understanding that skill, because a lot of what we believe is based on what we're told by people who are unqualified, and we don't take the time to prove it to ourselves. And so how many times have I said, oh, look, there's a hole in the Gans. Well, who caused that hole? How did that hole get there? You know, I didn't use a swizzle stick, and I didn't use a centrifuge. It just created a rotating field on itself. So what do you mean on itself? It just happened by itself? You mean there's no explanation for it? There has to be an explanation, because I don't have the answer. I don't have the explanation. Doesn't mean there is no explanation. And so none of us knows everything, and none of us knows a lot. But each of us knows something, and collectively we can figure it out. But in the process of figuring out, we have to be discriminatory. We have to say, this is part of the balancing process, and this is not part of the balancing process. And if instead of doing this on a physical basis, where I say, look, you know, I don't want you here, so I'm going to kill you. If we can do this a little bit more gracefully and the way we've been doing it on this planet, is we either fight or we run away. But how about if we can find a coexistence? So you don't need to fight and I don't need to run away. And it starts where I don't need to fight, so you don't need to run away. I hope I've helped with that, Claudia.
Yes, thank you so much, Alex. Thank you so much.
So Mark, just before I hand it back to you, I just want to add that one more thing, and I mentioned it earlier. You know, in the physicality, you know, we have a nearness to the plasmatic matter state. So what we have to do is, because plasma can absorb fields, or plasma can be a barrier of fields, we have to be able to open to absorb higher plasma fields, and we need to be setting up a barrier to lower plasma fields. And so the gravitational and magnetical boundaries are within the responsibility of the soul of the man and the soul of the physicality. And in between those two boundaries, we have our existence and our coexistence. And so this is the new reality. And so if we use that plasmatic energy as the means of navigating, using the properties of magnetical and gravitational field forces, based on our essence, based on our intention, and our intention is based on the balance between our soul of the man and soul of the physicality, you see. So that becomes the beacon. That becomes the light that we follow. And so wherever we land, not only would that be peaceful, but it needs to remain peaceful for the sake of us being there. But it would really be peaceful for the soul if, before we leave, if we could improve the earth, because we've made a mess. We can't leave our mess behind. The amount of the mess does not represent the amount of the enjoyment, the amount of the beauty, or the amount of the contribution. It's not a make-work project for somebody. Well, I created the mess, so you have a job. There are enough jobs. We don't have enough people to do all the jobs. Thank you all for letting me keep presenting every week. And I hope you're enjoying this.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
Anyone else would like to add anything else here? Okay, let's see if we can take the screen back. Oh, here we have Alex, okay. But as Mr. Kesh said, we left it to you lot for millions of years and all you did was mess it up. And we have certainly made a mess in a way. We haven't understood what was gifted to us, or we sort of got deeper into the matter state, forgetting our energy state. But as the mother said to the child, it's time to clean up your room. And I think this is, in a way, the process we're going through right now on a grand scale, so to speak. And of course, you say we haven't understood the cup or the cup of life. I know Mr. Kesh indicated it would take mankind hundreds of years to understand exactly what's going on in that cup. And in another instance, he said it'd take more than all of us on this planet to open up this knowledge. So we can see how many things are hidden and how deep this knowledge is. But we're working in that direction, and we look forward to the universal community helping us as well to open up this knowledge once we become a peaceful planet. Is there more you wanted to share, Alex? Please.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think I've done enough talking. I've either made things more clear or I've made things more muddy. But I think we
Mission is to
understand.
share what you think you understand about this knowledge. There's no offense there.
Oh, I know. And this is the reason, you know, we all take this very, very seriously. But I think what we're starting to realize is that maybe our desire is to do this a little bit more gradually, a little bit more gracefully, but you know, it's not easy to always be graceful. So we really have to be critical in our thinking and be very clinical in our methodologies. And so, you know, we've come to the point where the damage and the insult is becoming more and more extreme. It's almost as if it becomes a dare. You know that game where you used to play as a kid and you wanted to see, well, who could have the most the softest punch? And they would say, okay, well, you go first. And then you just kind of basically just touched them on the shoulder. And then the other guy comes and he slugs you right in the jaw and he says, well, I lose. I said, well, that's not fair. That was not the objective of the game. Well, you are just a sucker looking for a game. Um, a lot of people treat life that way, and that's one of the reasons we don't have a respect, don't have a respect for life. We don't have respect for our life. We don't have respect for our neighbor's life. And that's why we have to have the respect in order to elevate to the next level. And there are some people who just don't want to go to that next level. So what's the choice? The choice is they bring us down or we bring them up. Well, if we can't raise them, then we can elevate ourselves to a point where we become immune. And we need to get to that level and then make it their choice whether or not they want to join us or where they want to stay where they are. Because you cannot stay at the same point. You have to keep moving. So you're either moving on the same level or you're going up or you're going down. Those are the choices. And so we, as a humanity, have a new choice thanks to the understanding of the plasma science. And, this is not a novel thing. Many scientists in the past have understood this. So I learned this before I joined the Keshe Foundation. The problem, of course, was that we never knew how to implement the solution. We could only talk about the problem. And so a lot of people who are getting aware, that's what they have. They only can talk about the problem. And unfortunately, as they start to understand the seriousness of the problem, the depression sets in as well, because you're basically becoming more and more helpless. Well, with the plasma science, we're becoming more helpful. And so it only stands to reason that if we enlist the services of a higher power, we will be able to resolve our issues because we have clearly shown over the generations that enlisting the services of a weaker power makes us weaker. Thank you all. Back to you, Mike.
Okay, thank you all. I'll take the screen. We do appreciate you all being here. Let me see here. We need to do this. Okay. And this. Yes, thank you all for being here. And as we close, I just want to thank you all, and may you be proud of the work you do. May you be proud of the person you are, and may you be proud of the difference you make. A lot of times we're not seeing it, but we don't have to see it. We know in the future things will change, and maybe you'll get a feedback and maybe you won't. But it's all about serving. This is part of understanding the how the universe becomes an oyster for you. Is to learn how to serve and to be there to serve, not so much to take, but to give and share and be in the right place at the right time. So we thank you all for being here, carrying a very small corner of, as Mr. Keshe likes to say, this very large carpet. And of course, use the shielding that the three wise men, if you employ them, will give you a beautiful balance of emotions in so many ways, elevation of others, wellness for yourself. I think the emotional part is quite important. And of course, the three wise men stand for the thinking good, and speaking good and acting good, which if you can incorporate that into your life, I think it brings you health, it brings you wellness, and it brings you quite a bit of serving the others, because in this manner, you're not taking, you're actually giving or elevating the others in this process, or the shielding, as I would call it, in a way. So thank you all again. I'm sure we're going to see more and more things coming out of the Kesh Foundation, which will start to touch humanity in a much bigger way. We know we have the Aurora and its work going on. We have Mr. Kesh and the systems in the matter state. We're learning to use our own souls to elevate the others and all the inhabitants of this planet. And of course, the teachings are becoming deeper and deeper. And the more we understand, I think the more we can understand. And we're all on this journey, and no one is really ahead of anyone, and no one is really behind anyone, as we're all growing into the beautiful knowledge of the universe, the knowledge of creation, and understanding more about ourselves, which I think only you can do in so many ways. So thank you all for being here.